The escape pod burned through the night sky like a falling star. Inside it, an alien girl named Lyra held her seat tightly as warning alarms filled the small cabin. Red lights flashed around her. The ship behind her was gone, but the danger was not over yet. Her pod had lost control. It was falling toward an unknown planet that her people feared more than any other place in the galaxy. The name of that planet was Earth. Lyra had heard stories about humans since she was a child. Every school in the Alliance taught the same thing. Humans were hunters. Humans were predators. Humans lived on a dangerous world and survived by fighting everything around them. Some stories even claimed that humans ate intelligent aliens during wars long ago. Nobody knew if those stories were true, but nobody wanted to test them. The pod crashed deep inside a large forest. Trees shook as smoke rose into the cold air. Lyra slowly opened her eyes and looked around. Her head hurt badly. A small cut on her forehead sent blood down her cheek. The pod door opened with a loud hiss. She stepped outside and looked at the strange world around her. Giant trees stood everywhere. The air smelled fresh and wet after recent rain. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then she heard a distant roar. Lyra quickly grabbed her emergency scanner and checked the area. The scanner showed many life signs moving through the forest. Some were large, some were very large. Her heart began to race. Earth was already dangerous enough, but being injured and alone made everything worse. She needed shelter before night arrived. She also needed food and water if she wanted to survive. She started walking through the forest slowly. Every sound made her nervous. Leaves moved in the wind. Birds flew above the trees. Strange animals cried somewhere in the distance. Lyra had never seen a world like this before. Most planets in the Alliance had cities and machines everywhere. Earth felt alive in a different way. It felt wild. It felt ancient. Most of all, it felt like something was watching her. Hours passed. The sun slowly moved lower in the sky. Lyra finally found a small stream and drank some water. She washed the blood from her face and sat near the rocks to rest. That was when she noticed footprints in the mud beside the stream. They were larger than her feet and looked fresh. Her scanner confirmed her fear only seconds later. Human life signs. Very close. Lyra immediately stood up and looked around. Her breathing became faster. She remembered every warning she had ever heard about humans. Never approach them, never trust them, never let yourself be captured alive. If humans lived nearby, then she needed to leave immediately. She turned around and hurried deeper into the forest, hoping the human had not seen her. Then the ground disappeared under her feet. A loud snap echoed through the trees. Lyra screamed. A rope pulled her leg upward and lifted her into the air. Within seconds, she was hanging upside down several meters above the ground. Her emergency scanner fell from her hand and landed below her in the dirt. Panic filled her mind as she struggled against the rope holding her leg tightly. It was a trap. A human trap. Lyra tried to reach the knot, but she could not move high enough. The rope only became tighter every time she fought against it. Minutes passed. Then more minutes followed. Slowly, her strength began to fade. Blood rushed to her head as the sky grew darker above the trees. Night was coming. Fear slowly turned into terror. If the trap belonged to a human hunter, then he would return soon to check it. Lyra closed her eyes as terrible thoughts entered her mind. Maybe the stories were true. Maybe humans really hunted intelligent species. Maybe she had escaped pirates only to fall into something much worse. The forest became silent. Too silent. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps moved through the trees toward her position. Branches cracked under powerful boots. A shadow appeared between the trees. The figure was tall, much taller than she expected. A flashlight moved across the ground before stopping directly on her face. For the first time in her life, Lyra saw a human. He looked up at the trapped alien girl, and then he slowly reached for the knife hanging at his side. The human slowly pulled the knife from his belt and walked closer to Lyra. Her body became cold with fear. This was the moment she had feared since childhood. Every story she had heard about humans returned to her mind at once. She closed her eyes and waited for the end. But instead of pain, she heard the sound of rope being cut. A second later, Lyra fell onto the soft ground below. The human quickly stepped forward before she could hit the rocks nearby. He moved back immediately after making sure she was safe. For a moment, neither of them moved. The human simply stood there while Lyra stared at him in complete shock. This was not what she expected at all. The human pointed toward her injured leg and spoke slowly. Lyra could not understand his language, but his voice sounded calm. He carefully opened a small bag hanging from his shoulder. Then he took out clean cloth and medical supplies. Lyra tried to move away, but pain shot through her leg. The human stopped and waited for her decision. After a few seconds, he slowly placed the medical kit on the ground between them. Then he stepped back and raised both hands to show he meant no harm. Lyra looked at the supplies and then back at him. If he wanted to hurt her, he already had the chance. Instead, he was giving her the choice to trust him. Slowly, the human moved closer again and pointed toward the wound. Lyra nodded nervously. He cleaned the injury carefully and wrapped it with fresh bandages. His hands moved with surprising care and experience. Several times he stopped to make sure he was not hurting her. Lyra could hardly believe what she was seeing. According to everything she knew, humans were cruel predators. Predators did not treat wounded strangers. Predators did not risk their safety to help trapped aliens. Yet the human sitting beside her had done exactly that. He finished the bandage and gave her a small container of water. Then he simply sat down a few meters away. Night had fully arrived by then. The forest around them became dark and silent. The human stood up and began collecting dry branches from nearby trees. A few minutes later, a small fire burned between them. Warm orange light pushed back the darkness around the camp. Lyra quietly watched every movement he made. The human opened a metal box and removed some food from inside. He broke part of it into smaller pieces and placed them near her. Then he pointed toward the food and smiled slightly. Lyra looked at it suspiciously for several seconds. Was this some kind of trick? Was he preparing her for something worse later? Her stomach answered before her mind could. She had not eaten since escaping the pirates many hours earlier. Slowly, she picked up the food and examined it with her scanner. The scanner showed no poison and no danger. Carefully, she took a small bite. To her surprise, it tasted good. The human noticed her reaction and quietly laughed to himself. He opened another package for his own meal and began eating. He never once stared at her or made her uncomfortable. Instead, he looked toward the trees surrounding their camp. It almost felt like he was protecting her instead of guarding a prisoner. Several hours passed beside the fire. Lyra remained awake while the human checked strange devices around the campsite. Finally, he spread a blanket near the fire and prepared to sleep. Before lying down, he placed his rifle beside a tree several steps away from both of them. Then he closed his eyes. Lyra stared at the weapon in disbelief. Every military officer in the Alliance knew one rule about predators. Predators never slept near prey without keeping their weapons close. Yet the human had left his only weapon where she could reach it first. If she wanted, she could grab it and run into the forest immediately. But another question troubled her even more. Why had he trusted her? The fire slowly crackled in the cold night air while strange sounds echoed through the distant forest. Lyra looked at the sleeping human and then at the rifle near the tree. Nothing about this situation made sense anymore. Everything she had learned about humanity was falling apart piece by piece. Then suddenly the human's eyes opened. He sat up instantly and looked toward the dark forest. A distant light flashed between the trees. The human grabbed his rifle, and for the first time that night fear appeared on his face. The human stood beside the fire with his rifle in his hands. His eyes remained fixed on the dark forest ahead. Lyra followed his gaze but saw nothing except trees and shadows. Then another flash of light appeared between the branches. This time she recognized it immediately. It was not a natural light. It came from advanced technology. Lyra's heart suddenly sank. She quickly grabbed her scanner from the ground and activated it. The screen showed several energy signals moving through the forest. Their location matched the direction of the lights. There was no doubt anymore. The pirates who attacked her transport ship had reached Earth. Somehow they had tracked her escape pod across space. The human noticed the fear on her face. He pointed at the scanner and then toward the forest. Lyra slowly nodded. The human understood immediately. He looked back toward the trees and his expression became serious. Without saying a word, he kicked dirt over the fire until the flames disappeared. Seconds later, darkness covered the campsite once again. The human motioned for Lyra to follow him. Despite her injured leg, she stood and moved behind him through the trees. He walked carefully and quietly, as if he knew every part of the forest by memory. Several times he stopped to listen to distant sounds. Lyra realized that this human was not simply surviving in this world. He belonged to it. After several minutes, they reached a small wooden cabin hidden between large rocks. The human opened the door and quickly led her inside. The room was simple, but warm. There were shelves, tools, supplies, and strange human machines everywhere. The human locked the door and closed the windows immediately. Lyra looked around nervously. She activated her scanner once more and checked the pirate signals. They were getting closer. Much closer. The pirates would search the entire area until they found her. She knew exactly what would happen if they succeeded. Escaped prisoners were never allowed to live long enough to escape twice. The human walked toward a table and placed several objects on it. Maps, tools, and weapons quickly covered the wooden surface. He pointed toward the scanner and asked a question she could not understand. Lyra pressed several buttons and projected the pirate locations into the air. The human studied the display carefully. A few moments later, he smiled slightly. It was not the smile of someone who was afraid. It was the smile of someone solving a problem. The human pointed toward himself and spoke one word slowly. Ethan. Lyra looked at him for a second before understanding. He was telling her his name. After a moment, she pointed toward herself. Lyra. The human repeated her name carefully before nodding with satisfaction. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra felt slightly safer. The human named Ethan returned to his table and continued preparing his equipment. Outside, the forest remained silent and dark. Then a loud sound echoed across the sky. Both of them rushed outside the cabin. Far above the trees, a black ship moved through the clouds. Bright searchlights swept across the forest below. The pirates had arrived faster than expected. Ethan watched the ship carefully while Lyra felt fear spread through her body once again. She turned toward Ethan. Run, she whispered quietly, even though he could not understand her language. But Ethan did not run. Instead, he checked his rifle, looked toward the enemy ship, and smiled again. For the first time, Lyra realized something important. The pirates had come looking for her, but now they would have to deal with a human first. Ethan watched the pirate ship move slowly above the forest. Its searchlights cut through the darkness like giant white blades. Lyra knew the pirates would find the cabin sooner or later. She looked toward Ethan, expecting fear or panic. Instead, the human calmly walked back inside the cabin. His face showed only focus. Inside the cabin, Ethan opened several metal boxes hidden under the floor. Lyra watched as he removed tools, wires, batteries, and strange devices. None of them looked like military equipment. Yet Ethan moved with confidence as he placed everything on the table. It almost looked like he had prepared for this moment long ago. The human walked outside again and disappeared into the trees. Nearly 20 minutes passed before he returned. During that time, Lyra heard metal sounds coming from the forest. She heard ropes moving and branches breaking. When Ethan finally returned, dirt covered his hands and clothes. Still, he looked completely satisfied. Suddenly, the scanner on Lyra's wrist began to beep loudly. The pirates had landed. Their signals were less than 2 kilometers away. Lyra felt her stomach tighten with fear. There were 6 of them according to the scanner. 6 armed pirates against 1 human living alone in the forest. The battle was already over before it even started. At least that was what Lyra believed. Ethan looked at the scanner and nodded quietly. Then he turned off every light inside the cabin. The room became dark except for the moonlight entering through the windows. Ethan moved toward a small window and watched the trees carefully. Minutes later, distant voices echoed through the forest. The pirates were getting closer with every passing second. Then the first scream came. A loud cry echoed through the night. 1 pirate signal suddenly disappeared from Lyra's scanner. Another scream followed only seconds later. Then a second signal vanished. Lyra looked toward Ethan in complete shock. The human remained perfectly calm as if everything was happening exactly as planned. He simply checked his rifle and continued watching the forest outside. The remaining pirates stopped moving. They had realized something was wrong. Searchlights flashed between the trees while angry voices filled the night air. Then another loud snap echoed through the forest. A third pirate signal disappeared from the scanner. Lyra suddenly remembered the trap that had caught her earlier. Ethan had not built traps to hunt animals alone. He had built them to defend his home. The pirate leader shouted orders to his team. The remaining signals quickly moved toward the cabin. This time, Ethan stood up and opened the door himself. He stepped outside into the cold night air and raised his rifle. Lyra watched from the window as the human faced the approaching enemies alone. The pirates carried advanced weapons from across the galaxy. Ethan carried a hunting rifle. The first pirate fired. A bright energy blast struck the ground beside Ethan. The human moved instantly and disappeared behind a tree before firing back. His shot echoed through the forest like thunder. Seconds later, another pirate signal vanished from the scanner. Only 2 enemies remained now. Lyra could hardly believe what she was seeing. The pirates had superior technology. They had better weapons. They had larger numbers. Yet somehow they were losing. For the first time, Lyra understood something her people had never learned about humans. Humans did not survive because they were stronger than every enemy. Humans survived because they adapted faster than every enemy. On Earth, intelligence was often more dangerous than technology. The final pirate suddenly ran toward the cabin. Before Lyra could react, Ethan stepped directly into his path. The pirate raised his weapon. Ethan raised his rifle. The forest became silent. Then one final shot broke the night. The shot echoed through the forest, and then everything became quiet. Lyra stood frozen near the cabin door, afraid to look outside. For several seconds, she heard nothing except the wind moving through the trees. Then she saw Ethan walking back toward the cabin. He was tired and covered in dirt, but he was alive. The last pirate had been defeated. Ethan lowered his rifle and looked toward the sky. Above the forest, the pirate ship slowly turned away from the area. Without their ground team, the mission was over. The ship disappeared behind the clouds and vanished into the night. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Lyra felt safe again. She looked at Ethan with disbelief. One human had defeated enemies armed with advanced technology. One human had protected someone he had never met before. Most importantly, he had risked his own life for a stranger from another world. Nothing in her education had prepared her for this reality. Everything she believed about humans had been wrong. As the sun began to rise, Ethan started cleaning the area around the cabin. He repaired broken fences and collected damaged equipment from the forest. To him, it almost seemed like an ordinary morning. Lyra watched him work and wondered how many times humans had faced danger like this before. A few hours later, her scanner detected a friendly signal. A rescue ship from the Alliance had finally arrived. The ship landed in a nearby field while medical teams rushed toward her position. The officers were shocked to find her alive. They were even more shocked to learn who had protected her. Several officers looked nervously toward Ethan standing beside his cabin. One of them asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Why did the human save you?" Lyra looked toward Ethan for a moment before answering. "He saw someone who needed help." The officers remained silent. That answer made no sense to them. Before leaving, Lyra walked toward Ethan one final time. The human smiled and handed her a small object. It was a simple wooden carving shaped like a bird. Lyra held it carefully in her hands while Ethan pointed toward the sky and then toward her ship. It was his way of saying goodbye. The rescue ship slowly lifted into the sky and disappeared into the clouds above Earth. Through the window, Lyra looked down at the small cabin hidden deep inside the forest. Somewhere below, a human returned to his quiet life as if nothing unusual had happened. But for Lyra, everything had changed. Months later, her story spread across the Alliance. People listened in silence as she described the human hunter, the traps in the forest, and the battle against the pirates. Some believed her story immediately. Others refused to accept it. After all, it was easier to fear humans than to understand them. But Lyra knew the truth. Humans could be dangerous. Humans could be terrifying. Humans could fight harder than anyone in the galaxy. Yet when someone was under their protection, there was no safer place in the universe than beside a human. The galaxy feared humanity because humans were predators. One day, the galaxy learned something even more frightening. Humans protect what they consider family.